this so we have it. Okay, so chapter 7 technically deals with, it's the cash chapter, but as you see, it talks about fraud and internal control along with cash. So much of what we're going to be looking at in chapter 7 is the issue of fraud and what internal control is, because that's a super important aspect that everyone needs, not just folks who are going to be accountants. This is actually a management duty. And as an employee of some business, you've probably been affected by this, and I'd like to hear your story if that's been the case. Okay. So mostly for chapter 7, we're going to be focusing mostly on objective 1, and that's pretty much it. There might be a little bit of overlap between 1 and 2, but basically this is going to be what we're going to be dealing with in chapter 7 in this class. You don't have to worry about the other stuff. Okay, so first of all, let me just preface this by saying this definition of fraud is somewhat narrow, right? Because we're looking at fraud as a dishonest act by an employee, right? That results as a loss to the employer. Okay, so we're narrowing our definition of fraud to that when we talk about it here. Of course, fraud is much bigger than that as a legal concept, and we're not getting into any of that stuff, but we're only looking at it from this narrow definition. As you see, your book explains that there are 3 factors that contribute to fraudulent activity in a business, okay? And as I was explaining earlier, some of you, and only a couple of you actually have had the opportunity to handle cash for a business, right? Because you might have been a cashier or another position where, you know, handling cash from customers was a normal part of your job duties. Well, anyone who has a chance to handle cash literally has the opportunity, right, to commit fraud, because that, you know, if you have an opportunity to handle these assets like cash or inventory, the opportunity is there to also take it. So the first factor that's talked about is, you know, who's given the opportunity, right, to handle corporate assets like cash, like inventory, like supplies, et cetera, because that's where it all starts. The second aspect of the triangle that's listed here is that the employee is dealing with some type of financial pressure. And so what this means is life is difficult. The more responsibilities you have, the more it's going to cost you. So you've got rent and food and other bills, and you might have a family, and you know you need to provide for certain things there. So there's going to be financial pressure on people anyway. But then add to this the fact that we're human, and we come into life with pretty open to developing various addictions, and whether that's an addiction to drugs or alcohol, that costs money. Whether it's an addiction to shopping or other types of activities, gambling, for example, that costs money. So, you know, those financial pressures have to be added and included with just the general expenses of the day of needing to pay this, pay that in general. So a lot of financial pressure can be brought to bear on a human being in various forms. When you look at the third point of this, you'll see it's called rationalization, right? And rationalization basically, right, is convincing yourself that it's okay to do something that's not okay. Right? In other words, you're trying to convince yourself that it's right to do something wrong. Right. You've always learned from kindergarten on, even prior, don't touch things that don't belong to you. Don't take things that don't belong to you. But yeah, that's exactly what this allows us to do, right? Rationalization, in essence, is convincing ourselves that because we have the opportunity to handle cash, because we're under some financial pressure, because we live in a difficult world with a lot of different things, then somehow we can rationalize that it's okay, right? So some people will say, oh, well, it's only $100 and this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They're never going to miss it. That's a rationalization, right? Because it's not your $100 to take. It's the company's money. You are getting paid to do your job, and that's not part of it, right? So the rationalization that it's a big company, they'll never miss it, is just convincing yourself to do something wrong, that it's right to do something wrong, right? The same thing is true as though you rationalize, oh, I'll take this stuff because, you know, I've worked twice as hard. I should have got that promotion and they didn't give it to me, so I deserve this. That's rationalization, right? Because you're convincing yourself, you're rationalizing that it's okay to do something that you know is not okay. Okay. So when these three factors come into being, you're ripe for fraudulent activity. In other words, people will commit fraud. Well, we looked at the Sarbanes-Oxley Act but you're introduced to this way back in chapter 2, when we looked at certain things about GAAP and so forth. But Sarbanes-Oxley basically was a law passed by Congress in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, that area there. And it basically dealt with this idea that fraud happens and companies have to do more to control it. And so Sarbanes-Oxley applied to basically corporations who are publicly traded, which means they have shares of stock on the market where you and I can be an owner. What they're required to do is put in place a system of internal controls to make sure that fraud is not happening. Okay. For the very, very first time, corporate executives and board of directors, right, have to ensure that these controls are in place, they're reliable, and they're effective. Not only that, they actually have to sign off on the financial statements that the financial statements are accurate. Otherwise, they could go to jail under Sarbanes-Oxley, and that's the first time that can happen. So this can be pretty good. Companies that are required to hire an outside accounting firm, that's called an outside auditor, to come in and see if they're doing a bunch of things right, including they're following the rules of generally accepted accounting principles, and that they have an internal control system in place that is adequate in protecting the assets of the company, okay, particularly those that are most vulnerable, like cash. And so basically the independent auditor needs to say, yeah, this company is doing what the law is asking it to do or requiring it to do. Put these things in place, okay? The actual act, again, called SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, created a public company accounting oversight board to enforce the law, which is what this act is. So it became law. And so once Congress creates a law and the president signs it, then it's up to the executive branch, right, to create the law creates an executive branch that's run by the executive to say, this is how we're going to enforce the law, okay? So that's basically what happens there. So Sarbanes-Oxley is a very important act that you should know about. It obviously is extremely important to our discussion here in Chapter 7. So internal control. Internal means within the company. Control is, can you set up a system or systems that help you safeguard your assets? In other words, Stop them from getting stolen, right? Stop fraud from occurring, okay? If you can, you're going to enhance the accuracy and liability of your accounting records. If you put those in place and now those are working, your books will be more accurate. Things will be more reliable. You might find by putting all these things in place, you actually become more efficient. It might actually help you become more efficient. And of course, with all these things in place, you will comply with the law. In this case, Sarbanes-Oxley. So your review question here, internal control is used in a business to enhance the accuracy and reliability of its accounting records, and to A, B, C, or D. If you picked A, you were correct. It's all about safeguarding assets. Safeguarding assets, right? Do not let them get stolen. Excuse me. Okay, so under the internal control, we have several or 5 primary components that we're going to be looking at individually, okay, as we go through this, as you'll see. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at here, a type of internal control activity which should be more common as a corporation is larger, is can you establish responsibility to one person, okay, that's in control of stuff. And here they actually have example of, a cash register where you have every employee has their own cash drawer, okay? And so basically speaking, when you get into your shift, you will get your own cash drawer. They'll already know, because it's already been counted in terms of what amount of money or what amount of cash is in it. You're going to be working for, 4 6 hours on a register. You're going to be checking people out and collecting cash. Well, that's going to show on your register tape how much cash you should be collecting. And at the end of the day, you're going to count that drawer with someone else to make sure that it's accurate, right? If it's not accurate, at least we know who to talk to as a business. So establishing responsibility requires limiting access to authorized personnel. And then if something goes wrong, we can identify the people to talk with. We just, your drawer is off by $200. What happened, right? So these are important. Has this happened to anybody? Has anyone had worked at a place where you had your own drawer?
Yeah, I did at Zara.
It's okay. What company was this?
Zara, it's a clothing company.
Okay, so you were given your own drawer, and you had to. So what I was saying was accurate. You had to. Everything was counted at the end, and you had to balance out.
Yeah, in the morning it would be counted, and then if someone was coming in after you, you would count out your drawer, and then they would take over with the correct amount.
Got it. Okay, so that's a way of establishing responsibility. That what you just went through, Parker, was an internal control activity that was put in place by your company to make sure that if anything was missing in terms of the cash drawer, they knew who to talk to. So, and other people might have that same experience, and if you don't mind sharing, you are welcome to do so as we go through. Another way that they handle this is to separate or segregate the duties so that different individuals are responsible for similar activities. And so it's easier to find out if fraud is happening, okay? And so here your book gives you the idea that the record keeping for an asset is going to be separate from the actual physical custody of that asset, right? So you might have someone who maintains the books, right? That's the employee A here, and they're looking at cash through the record keeping system. This is how much cash we have. And then there's a separate employee who actually is counting the physical cash And that's how they separate. Actually, these two employees should be counting, whether it's on the books or physically, the same amount of cash. So sometimes when a company segregates the duties, they are putting in place an internal control function that verifies the accuracy of the record. Okay, and this doesn't only happen with cash, it can happen with inventory or other assets. Of course, companies use a lot of documents to make sure that things are controlled, right? So a lot of companies will use a pre-numbered documents and make sure that everything is accounted for. And so here you have all these invoices that are pre-numbered, right? And so they're going to make sure that these numbers are followed and everything is accounted for. So if by chance number 125 is missing, they're going to need to go back and what happened to 125, right? There's a feature there. So these are source documents that are part of that record keeping process that allow them to control and monitor activities to make sure everything is up to par. We've all been through and have witnessed physical controls of all sorts. I know for all of you, and I'd like to hear your stories on this, time clocks used to be one way of keeping records to make sure employees were not stealing time, right? Because it's easy to, have someone clock in for you. And you show up an hour late, but you got paid for the hour. That's fraud. That's an example of fraud, right? Where an employee is stealing from an employer. What do you guys do at your work for those that are working or have worked? Has anyone used a time clock, or is it something different?
Yeah, I had a like a virtual card that I had to punch in.
Oh,
And basically, like, if you forgot to punch it in the beginning of the day, you were screwed. Like, you didn't make any money. So I had, like, my first week there, I made, like, half payments because I'm stupid. And I would, like, punch in at lunch because I would forget to do it at 7 o'clock in the morning. But,
that hurt. Okay.
yeah, that definitely hurt the bank account a little bit.
Definitely. Anybody else?
I have a clock in. I work at Rocking Horse Ranch, and with the time clock, it scans your fingerprint. So no,
They scan a fingerprint.
with you.
And you scan that on the way in and on the way out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have a time clock with a fingerprint.
Okay, terrific. So this is an internal control measure to help have a record of your time in and out. It's changing a lot because a lot of companies don't use an official time clock. They're going to use your manager to verify that you actually were there for certain hours. So you might put in a physical time card, like you might write out your hours, or your manager might write them out and sign off that you actually were there during that time. Does anyone do that type of a system at work?
Yeah, they do that at the ranch too. We have the clock in with the finger, and we have a manager physically sign us out as well. So there's both.
Okay, I thought it was a place where you can relax. Just joking. Okay, so anyway, yeah, they have to do what they got to do. All right, so some of the other stuff you probably have seen too, certainly when you've been in the store, you've probably seen that you're being monitored, right? As you're looking through inventory on the rack at one of your favorite stores. There's cameras all over. There might be secret shoppers. There's these sensors that are attached to certain inventory. Some inventory that's very expensive are locked behind cabinets. They might have a wire through them or something that needs to be unlocked by a salesperson. That's also a physical control, okay? Of course, there are all different types of alarms on every type of business because they don't want anyone breaking in and stealing stuff. So that alarm is technically a physical control. For those that work with businesses that have safes or vaults in the background. It doesn't have to be a bank. Most businesses have some type of safe or vault in the back. But usually it's limited to so many people who may have the combination or not. But oftentimes it will be limited to just management that has it, so they can physically control who has access to the drawer and who's responsible. And also you're going to have, I don't know if this has happened to anybody, but yeah, you did say fingerprints. Some folks were having fingerprints. I'm really not looking forward to the day they do an eyeball scan. I'm really not. I know it's coming. It's here in some places already. Kind of nuts to me, but oftentimes what's very common is you'll get a passcode. And so even if you're not, if it's a common drawer, like at, when I go into Stewart's, sometimes I'll just see there might be 3 people working and 1 register in operation. So it becomes a common drawer. Other businesses might have that where they actually, when you go up to a drawer to help a customer, you got to put your code in. And that's how they monitor who's using the cash register at that time. But they're doing all different types of things. And of course, warehouses and storage cabinets for inventories are kind of locked up. It's all part of control. It's usually important that someone on the inside of the company provide what's called an independent verification of what's going on. And so let's go back to our separation of duties when you had the employee here who is actually just doing the bookkeeping for cash, and separate from the employee who actually is keeping the physical cash. So you got the physical cash right here versus just the bookkeeping, right? Now that's segregation of duties. How is that working out? Well, a third party who isn't directly involved but knows what's going on, like an assistant treasurer here, they would actually make reconciliations of those. And if there's any differences, they can investigate, right, for that. So that's an independent verification. Any discrepancy is reported to management and usually investigated. And the last one here that's listed here are something called human resource controls. It's interesting that we're looking at all different types of things that revolve around this very important topic, which is in accounting, but actually affects everybody in the company, employees and management alike. Okay, internal controls activities will affect you regardless. So the first thing that you have to understand is when you get a job that you're handling assets like cash, you will need to be bonded. Does anyone know what that means? We're not talking 50 Shades, okay. What we're doing here is we're talking about insurance, okay. So the bonding of employee is basically the ability for a company to have insurance against theft that might occur by you as an employee, okay. And so you have to pass a certain level of a background check, that's down here as well. That proves in essence that you don't have a record of doing any of this stuff, criminally or otherwise. And so it would be easy for your employer to purchase insurance, which is bonding you in case you're handling cash, in case you're handling inventory. But bonding is a very important part of human resource controls, because they have to trust you, and if you screw up, they don't want to take a loss for it. The insurance ensures that they will not take a loss in case the employee does something wrong. Okay, they have insurance on that. Another thing that they'll do is they'll rotate duties of certain employees and they'll require you to take vacations. And then they'll monitor any differences while you're not there. So This happened in a suburb of Boston. I remember I'm from Massachusetts originally. One of the wealthy suburbs of Boston is called Brookline. Yes, you guys have Brooklyn, and we have Brookline. And Brookline was, again, it's a very wealthy part of town. It's a very nice place to go shopping. And back in the day, when I was your age, you'd go shopping there, you'd park your car, you'd have to feed the meter with nickels, dimes, quarters. They were cool because you could use all of them. Any coin was a good coin back then. And so basically speaking, they had these meter readers that they called meter maids back then, who would, not only check to see if you were paid and give you a ticket, but there were others who were right behind them who collected the money from the little devices you put money in, the meter. Yes, Michael, it's the meter. Okay, so they put this employee who's been with them for a long time. They required her to take vacations on a regular basis. And what they noticed every time she took a vacation, the person who covered her rounds collected more money than when she was there. And this happened over quite a period of time. They gave it over to the district attorney's office. They had probable cause to subpoena her bank records and other things. And of course, they knew how much she got paid because she was a town employee. Town employees, city employees do this type of work. So they can see when they look at her bank account what her regular deposits were for her check, because they could trace that. And then they saw all these other deposits. And that's because she was skimming money off of the meters as she was collecting. So it might be that it's interesting that they want you to have a vacation. And you say, oh, isn't that nice? They're giving me a week vacation. But actually, while you're not there, they're making sure that any activity on your desk that's different needs to be looked into. That's what happened to that lady in Brookline. I worked on a trading desk. Goldman Sachs was my client, $3.2 billion in money market. About $700 million to $800 million a day would go through my desk in trades that I was responsible for. So I would get audited every 6 months by the independent accounting firm. Would come in. They'd let me know what trades they needed to see, because I was doing the trading, I was doing the accounting, doing the yields, put those in the newspaper at that time. And they also required vacations because they wanted to make sure that if someone else was covering the desk, things were running the same way. So it's not that they're being very caring that they want you to take a vacation. They just might want to check to see if you're doing your job and if there's any fraud happening. Okay, so the principles of internal control do not include any responsibility on the point of management. So it's just that managers have to put into place various systems, internal controls, to make sure things are working. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a moment, go back to the main screen. I see that we've been joined by a few more folks, which is great. Any questions so far? All right, so if you do have any questions, again, take yourself off mute and speak, or you can type them into the chat, that's fine. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at a bunch of what we call an anatomy of a fraud or anatomy of a crime. If you like shows like, the old Law and Order type of things, then you're going to love this stuff. So we're going to look at things that happened and what companies should have done to stop it from happening. And that's going to be basically what your homework is going to be like. Okay, so I'm going to go over it here with you, and then you're going to go ahead and do it on your own. You'll have, of course, all week to do it. It's no big deal. So it's a short part of we're only doing a little bit of the chapter, so it's not going to be overwhelming for this, and it's all reading stuff, so that should help. No accounting. Ooh, it's about accounting without actually doing the accounting. pretty damn good. Okay, so let's go back here. There are 7 anatomies that we're going to be looking at. So if it was Gray's anatomy, that might be a little bit better, but it's not. So here's the first one. We have this lady, Maureen Fergali. She was the training supervisor for claims processing at an insurance, Colossal Healthcare. Okay. As a part of the claims processing training program, Maureen created fictitious claims, so false claims, so the trainees can use them. However, these fictitious claims were sent to the accounts payable department. Okay. After the training class, she had to notify accounts payable of the fictitious claims so they wouldn't be paid. However, she did not inform accounts payable about every claim. She created some claims for entities that she controlled, and she would let accounts payable pay her the extra money. How much did it cost this healthcare company? $11 million. Okay. What was missing? What was missing? Well, basically, the company needed to establish a stronger responsibility to her, right? The training supervisor should not have had the ability to create claims in the live system. They should have used some type of dummy system. They also did not adequately restrict who could authorize a claim and who could approve a claim, okay, through that particular system. And so based on that missing control, $11 million gone. That's fraud. Here is a guy, Larry Fairbanks, who is an assistant vice president of communications at Aesop University. Okay. This person was allowed to make purchases under $2,500 without external approval. So they gave this person the power to spend or make purchases under $2,500 without anyone else needing to sign it other than him. Unfortunately, he also bought items for himself, such as expensive antiques and other collectibles. Well, how did he do it? He replaced the vendor invoice he received with fake invoices he created. The invoices had descriptions that were more consistent with the purchases of that department. He submitted them and he got paid. How much did he end up taking from this university? Almost $500,000 this way. That's a lot of $2,500 purchases. Yeah. What was the missing control here? Well, the university was segregation of duty. Right? The university did not segregate the related duties of purchasing. This guy could order them, he could receive them, including the invoice. Okay. He had too much control over everything. That's why it needed to be segregated. Okay. And thus he was able to create the fake invoice, submit it, and get paid. The third one is about an accounts payable clerk for a construction company. Okay. So Miss Angela Bauer was busy. She prepared and issued checks to vendors. She also reconciled the bank statement. So she was the one who knew what the bank knew. No one else did. She perpetuated the fraud in the following way. She wrote checks for costs the company did not actually incur, such as fake taxes. A supervisor approved and signed the checks. Before issuing the check, though, she would white out the payee and change it to her name or an account she controlled. okay? She was able to conceal that theft because she also was the one who reconciled the bank statement with the books of the company. So no one else knew what was going on. Not good. She took over $500,000. Okay, so she did a lot of construction of fraud. Okay, missing control. Well, there was no separation or segregation of duties there, right? So she was the record keeper, and she knew about the cash. She did both systems. And so no one else knew who was going on, what was going on. And so she was able to get away with quite a bit. So the fourth example here of a fraud happened regarding travel costs, okay? So employees were going on trips for this fashion company, and they were required to submit receipts in order to get reimbursed, okay? So the receipts could include a few things. The first thing is a detailed bill for the meal, or the credit card receipt for the meal, or a copy of the employee's credit card bill that listed the item, okay? So a number of the designers who went on this traveling spree came up with a fraud scheme. This is conspiracy, right? They submitted the claims for the same expenses, but they did it differently. For example, if they had a meal together that cost $200, one person submitted the detailed meal bill. Another person submitted a credit card receipt. And the third person actually copied their credit card bill showing the meal as a line item. Thus, that $200 became $600, right? Because all three of them got the $200. They took $75,000 in total. Missing control, well, they had really bad documentation procedures, okay? The best thing they could have done to limit all of this stuff is simply to have a corporate credit card for all business expenses, and thus only one person would use it, and they would only show up once. Instead, they relied on personal credit cards and these photocopies and all this other stuff, and it got them into trouble. So poor documentation. This is a smaller one, really small. So this is a large insurance company called Centerstone Health, okay? The mail room received the insurance applications from prospective customers. The mail room employees then scanned those applications before they were processed. Once the application was scanned, they could be accessed online by authorized employees, okay? You got to understand that insurance agents at all these companies earn commission based on successful applications, okay? The sales agent's name is listed right on the application. However, 15% of all the applications were from customers who did not work with a sales agent. So two friends, Alex in record keeping, Parviz, who's a sales agent, thought up a way to perpetuate a fraud here, okay? Alex would identify the scanned applications that did not have an agent. After the business hours, he entered the mailroom, found the hard copy, and he wrote in Parvir's name, and then rescan the application for processing. Parviz received the commission and then split it. So they took almost $250,000 this way. That's a lot. Missing control, in this case, the process was physical, and so the physical controls were missing. So first of all, what the easiest way to have it a physical control is to lock your mailroom. Okay, so if that's where sensitive information is, it should be locked. Very simple physical control, right? During non-business hours. Access to anything during business hours should be controlled, highly controlled. That's why a lot of us now wear tags. We have name tags and scans. We have to scan ourselves into places now. This is an internal control, physical control. Secondly, right, the scanned applications could be accessed only by authorized employees using their password. However, the password for each employee was the same as the ID. So since employee ID numbers were available to everybody in the company, everyone in the company knew the password. Stupid. So that means unauthorized employees could access. So Alex could get in there anytime. Big problem. Okay. Another fraud coming up. Bobby Jean Donnelly, who was the office manager for Mod Fashion Corporation, that company again, was responsible for preparing the design center budget and reviewing expense reports submitted by her employees. Her desire to upgrade her wardrobe got the better of her. That's the rationalization shit we talked about. And she enacted a fraud involving filing expense reimbursement requests for her own personal clothing. Ouch. She was able to conceal that fraud because she was responsible to review all of them, including her own. Additionally, she sometimes was given the ultimate responsibility for signing off on all the expense reports when her boss was too busy. Because she also controlled the budget, she submitted her expenses, she coded the items. No one else knew, right? No one else knew. She took over $250,000 this way. That's a hell of a wardrobe. What the hell could you buy for that much money? Christ. I'd be dressed to the T's. So in this case, here you could argue that there was no independent internal verification that allowed her to perpetuate this fraud. Okay. So that's really, I mean, just because your boss is too busy, and he never noticed, you have to have some type of independent internal verification. So maybe a report could have been run that showed that her expenses were 10 times what they normally were. And so running certain statistical reports would show reimbursements per employee or something like this. And if anyone really stood out, you could see that there's fraud going on. That would have to be done independently. Last one. So we have Ellen Lowry, who was the desk manager, and Josephine Rodriguez, who was the head of housekeeping at Excelsior Inn, a luxury hotel. The two best friends were so dedicated that they never took vacations, and they frequently filled in for other employees who couldn't make it. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose job as head of housekeeping did not include cleaning rooms, often cleaned rooms herself, just to help the staff keep busy. Ellen, the desk manager, provided significant discounts to guests who paid cash. She kept the cash, never recorded it, in the computer system. Instead, she took the room out of circulation with a post routine maintenance. Because the room didn't show up as being used, it did not receive a normal housekeeping assignment. Instead, Josephine cleaned the rooms during the day, those particular rooms. Took $95,000. So in this case, human resource controls were missing, right? One thing is that the desk manager had been fired by previous employer. So a background check would have brought that up to the attention, and they might not have hired her. Okay. The fraud was detected at that business when she missed work due to illness. Also, a system of mandatory vacations and rotating days off would have increased the chances of seeing that fraud was happening earlier. Okay. So I lost a few people, that's okay. But I wanted to make sure everyone understood this is the new normal for Chapter 7.